One night in 1993, exactly at 11:10 p.m., two girls were leaving a party they had attended. They were running late and needed to get home quickly. In front of them were two paths. The first was well lit and full of people, but if they took it, they wouldn't arrive quickly. The second path was shorter and would get them home fast, but it was dark and deserted. Unfortunately, the girls chose the shortcut, and it turned out to be the worst decision of their entire lives. Today's story takes us back to 1993 and to a city called Houston in the American state of Texas. There, two girls lived who were as close as sisters. The first girl's name was Jennifer Orthman, who was 15 years old, and the other was named Elizabeth Pena, who was 16. These girls met when they started kindergarten, and from then on, they became inseparable friends, totally devoted to each other. Everything they did together, and it was rare for them to be apart. Their parents were happy with their friendship because each girl had a positive influence on the other. Both were good students and stayed away from things like cigarettes, drugs, and anything similar. The one thing they were absolutely passionate about was fashion, clothes, and accessories. Elizabeth and Jennifer were the most stylish girls in their entire school. They knew how to match colors, style their hair, and choose the right accessories. Their dream when they grew up was to become fashion designers. When I watch American movies, usually this type of girl is stylish, fashionable, and always well-dressed. But they're often portrayed as mean or bullies, laughing at people who don't dress well and mocking everyone around them. However, in Jennifer and Elizabeth's case, they were the complete opposite. They were generous to such an extent that if another girl had a date or was going to a party and needed something to wear, she would go straight to them. Without hesitation, they'd lend her what she needed. And on top of that, they'd help her with her outfit, fix her hair, and do her makeup so she'd look beautiful. That day, as you've heard, the girls were just living their lives kind-hearted and happy, with big dreams, but unfortunately, they would soon cross paths with monsters without mercy in their hearts, and they would experience the worst moments anyone could go through in this life. On Thursday, June 24, 1993, Elizabeth and Jennifer were invited to a friend's birthday party at her house. At exactly 4:45 p.m., Jennifer's father dropped her off at Elizabeth's house so they could get ready together before heading to the party. The girls were excited and looking forward to it. They sat together, discussing and choosing what to wear, what accessories to put on, and so on. After picking their outfits, they dressed up, each helping the other with her makeup. Around 6:30 p.m., Elizabeth's mother drove them to the house where the party was held. Before they went inside, she told them, "Be home by 11:30. They reassured her, saying, "Don't worry, we'll be at the door by 11:30. Once inside, they spent a wonderful time with their friends, enjoying themselves so much that they lost track of time. When they finally looked at the clock, it was already 11:10 p.m., and they needed to be back at Elizabeth's house by 11:30. They quickly said goodbye to their friends and rushed out of the house. Now they had two choices. They could take the main road, where there were still people around and the lights were on, but they would arrive late. Or they could take a shorter route that would get them home on time, but it meant going through a forested area and crossing a railway track before reaching the neighborhood where Elizabeth's house was. Because they were already late, they unfortunately chose to go through the forest path. Elizabeth's mother woke up early in the morning to start her day, and as she was moving around, she glanced toward her daughter's room. The door was closed, but the light under the door was on. Jennifer had a habit of leaving her room light on when she went out, so her parents would know when she returned. She would turn it off. When Elizabeth's mother saw the light still on under the door, she thought, how come she didn't come home by 4 in the morning? Where could she have gone? She opened her daughter's door but didn't find her inside. She immediately woke her husband saying, "Our daughter didn't come back." He tried to calm her down, saying, "Don't worry, she probably just went to her friend Elizabeth's house and stayed the night there. She'll be back in the morning." Jennifer's mother felt a bit of relief, thinking that her daughter must have spent the night at her friend's house and would be back soon. But when morning came and there was still no sign of her, she called Elizabeth's house to check. However, no one answered, as Elizabeth's family was likely at work at that time. Elizabeth's family also assumed that their daughter had spent the night at Jennifer's house, so they hadn't checked further. Later on, Jennifer's mother decided to call the girl who hosted the birthday party to ask about them. She thought her daughter had stayed over at Elizabeth's, but she needed to confirm. When she finally got an answer, she was told, "I haven't seen the girls since last night. Around 11:10, they left because it was getting late." Jennifer's mother felt her heart sink, sensing that something serious had happened to the girls. She knew that the forest path was completely unsafe at night and usually deserted. She immediately called her husband, and together they went straight to Elizabeth's house to see if the girls were there. When they arrived, they found the house empty. They looked around, checking every corner, but found no one. Eventually, while they were still standing there, Elizabeth's parents came home, and the two families met, asking each other if their daughter had stayed the night and wondering where the girls could be and what had happened. Without delay, the four of them went straight to the police station to report Jennifer and Elizabeth's disappearance. The police started searching for them, questioning everyone who was at the party one by one. They issued missing person posters and placed them everywhere. The story was even broadcasted on TV and in newspapers, but there was no news of the girls. Their trail had vanished completely, driving their families to desperation. They searched every possible place, knocking on doors and asking people if they had seen or heard anything about the girls, but unfortunately, no one had. The search continued until exactly 4 days after the girls disappeared. On June 28, 1993, an anonymous caller contacted the police, saying he had important information about Jennifer and Elizabeth's disappearance. He told them that the girls had been killed and their bodies were in the middle of the forest. He provided an exact location where they could be found. The police immediately went to the location. First, they crossed a small bridge and then moved through an area with thick trees. There, they found 2 bodies lying on their backs not far apart, deep in the forest. The intense summer heat had deteriorated their appearance to the point that their faces were unrecognizable. But from their clothes, they confirmed the bodies were those of Elizabeth and Jennifer. Near the bodies, they found multiple sets of footprints, indicating that more than one person was involved in this terrible act. At the same time that the police found the bodies, Elizabeth's father was holding a press conference, speaking about his daughter's disappearance and asking people to help find her. At that moment, a police officer at the scene received a message from other officers saying they had found bodies in the forest and mentioned the exact location. Elizabeth's father, who was nearby, overheard this and immediately abandoned everything, rushing to the scene where police, forensic teams, and the media had already gathered. As soon as he arrived, the police tried to stop him to prevent him from seeing the bodies. They didn't let him through for 2 reasons. First, the state of the bodies was heartbreaking, and second, they didn't want to disturb the crime scene, which might contain evidence essential for solving the case. Unable to see the bodies, he desperately asked them, "Just tell me, does one of them have blonde hair?" The officer nodded and said yes. Right then, he knew that one of the bodies was his daughter, Elizabeth, and her friend Jennifer. Heartbroken, he began crying for his daughter, taken so young at only 16 years old. When the bodies were taken for an autopsy, they confirmed they were Jennifer and Elizabeth. The cause of death was strangulation. They had been choked to death and had suffered greatly before passing. Now, the detectives had a new mission: to find the monsters who had killed these innocent girls, who had done nothing wrong. Their only lead was the anonymous caller who informed them of the body's location. They needed to find him and question him to understand how he knew where the bodies were and who committed the crime. Since he had known the exact location, he likely also knew the killers. Although the call had been anonymous, the police managed to trace it to the address from which it had been made. 3 people lived in that house: a man named Joe, his wife, and his brother Peter. Armed with this information, the police immediately went to their house. When they knocked, Joe answered the door. His younger brother Peter wasn't home at the time. As soon as Joe saw the police, without them saying a word, he confessed, "I was the one who called and told you where to find the bodies." The police asked him how he knew the location of the bodies. Joe replied, "Because I know what happened that night." And he began to reveal the names of 6 young men, saying, "These are the people I told you about." Joe named those who committed the crime and told them that one of these people was his brother Peter, who lived with him. The investigators asked for permission to search his brother's room, and Joe agreed and took them there. As they searched, they quickly found many of the accessories that Elizabeth and Jennifer were wearing on the night they were killed. This confirmed that Joe's information was accurate. After finishing the search in Peter's room, they went back to Joe and asked him to recount all the details he knew about what happened that night. What he told them was heartbreaking. Now let's go back to the night of June 24th, 1993. As I mentioned before, the girls left the party and took the forest path to get home quickly. While walking through the forest, 2 young men passed by them. Their names were Roman and Frank. They looked at the girls but didn't say anything and continued on their way, minding their own business. These 2 were young. One was 18 and the other 16, and were members of a gang. That night, the gang members were meeting in the forest to welcome a new member. The gang members ranged in age from 14 to 18, and here are their names. Jesse Medellin, who was 18, Derek O'Brien, also 18, Peter Cantu, also 18, Efrain Perez, who was 17, Venancio Medellin, the youngest at 14, and Raul Villarreal, the new member, who was 17. After they all gathered in the forest and agreed that Raul had joined their gang, they brought drinks and sat down to celebrate. Roman and Frank, as I mentioned earlier, had met Jennifer and Elizabeth, and they needed to return as they were. The gang members said, "We need to go," and they told them, "All right, go ahead." As they were walking along the path, they encountered Jennifer and Elizabeth again. They didn't want them to leave alone. One of the gang members, Jose Medellin, noticed them and was very aggressive. He immediately began to harass Jennifer, who asked him, "Please, let me go. I just want to walk home." She tried to push past him, but Jose became furious and grabbed her by the thigh, telling her, "You're not going anywhere." In that moment, Elizabeth wanted to run away because she knew things were about to get bad, but she couldn't leave her friend behind. She stayed close, trying to help Jennifer, but the situation escalated quickly. Suddenly, the other gang members, who had been a bit further away, heard the girls' screams. When they came over and saw what was happening, they jumped in to join Jose. From that moment on, the horror began. The gang members started to threaten and intimidate the girls, making them fear for their lives, even as they tried to defend themselves and fight back. The gang members only became more violent. I can't go into too much detail about what happened next because YouTube doesn't allow it, but I can tell you that those two girls experienced some of the worst moments anyone could ever endure in their lives. Eventually, the gang leader, Peter, who was also Jose's brother, warned the other members, "Let's leave these two alone. They might report us to the police, and we'll all get caught. We need to kill them here now." One of the gang members said, "I don't agree with killing them. We should just threaten them, and they won't say anything." But the others liked the idea and said, "Yeah, let's do it." Raul, the new gang member, said, "I'll do this task." He wanted to prove himself and show that he deserved to be in this gang. He went to Jennifer first and told her to get on her knees and call one of the other members to help him take the rope off her neck. He and the other gang members started pulling at her, continuing to do so until they were sure she was dead. Imagine this whole scene happening in front of her friend Elizabeth, who was watching them in horror. When she saw them kill her friend, she tried to bargain with them, saying, "I promise I won't say anything. I'll become one of you and give you my number, and we can all hang out together." She started to plead and tried to convince them, but it was useless. She was crying, and they just laughed, telling her, "Take it easy, your turn is coming." Elizabeth made one last attempt to escape, but they caught her and gave her a fatal blow. During the autopsy, they found her teeth crushed and the ribs of one man also crushed. In the end, like her friend, she was killed. The gang took her body and left it next to her friend. Those people were literally monsters. I can't fathom that there are such people who can harm others without any reason. From here, I want to say to girls who are in a bad situation and think of taking shortcuts through deserted places that you never know who you might encounter. The crowded streets might lead you safely, while the empty ones could lead you to danger. Even if you feel desperate, avoid the dark and deserted roads. It's never worth the risk. After this group of 4 committed the crime, they all went to Peter's house, where he lived with his brother Joe and his wife. At that moment, when Joe and his wife entered, they were watching TV in the living room. When his wife looked at him, she saw blood on his clothes and said to him, "What's this blood?" He replied, "Oh, I don't know. We just did something that we enjoyed a lot." She asked them what they did, and at that moment, they started to boastfully recount what they had done to Jennifer and Elizabeth. They were lively and acted as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just captured 2 girls and tortured them that night. It wasn't just that. After they died, they took all the accessories that the girls had been wearing. One of them, named Jose, took a necklace that had a letter O on it. This necklace belonged to Elizabeth because her name starts with an O. He said it was for a friend of his named Esther, whose name also starts with an O, and he wanted to give it to her as a gift. His wife, Christina, was shocked when she heard this. They were left speechless and couldn't react because they were afraid of these clever boys. They finished their drinks, laughed, and perked up. Then all went back to Peter's house, where they all slept together in one room. Christina said to Joe, "Now I'm going to call the police and tell them everything. This is what your brother and his gang did, Joe. If he were any other brother, he wouldn't be as bad as that." Christina couldn't stay quiet about all this injustice, especially when she saw their faces on the news and realized they were still young with their whole lives ahead of them. She saw their parents crying and grieving for their daughters, who didn't know if they would ever get their lives back. She was feeling the pressure, urging Joe to call the police. When he hesitated, she insisted, "Just tell them where the bodies are so their parents can bury them before summer heat gets too intense." She said to him, "Is this the injustice that these girls lived through? Even a grave where their souls can rest won't be allowed for them." In the end, she told him, "If you don't want your identity known to the police, report it from an unknown number, and this way, they won't know who reported it." Joe finally agreed, and 4 days after the murder of these girls, he reported to the police about the location of their bodies. The police quickly responded. As I mentioned before, they went there and found the bodies. When they started their investigation, they looked for who had called with that unknown number and traced it back to Joe's house. On June 30th, 1993, 6 days had passed since the crime. The 4 of them were arrested when the police went to catch one of them named O'Brien at his house. When he saw them, he tried to escape through the back door, but the 4 police officers jumped on him and arrested him. While they were doing the arrest, they told him, "You are accused of murder." He replied, "Yes, I know about the 2 girls. The day will come when I'll be caught." He then said, "I'm the one who gave the knife to Raul to kill the girls, and that knife is in my house." When they went to his house and searched it, they found the knife he mentioned, and it still had the blood of the girls on it. The trial of these criminals began in February 1994, and each of them was tried separately. This meant that Elizabeth's case was discussed in each session, specifically detailing what happened to the girls. Elizabeth's father was present in every session, and each time, he would cry for his daughter Elizabeth. During one of the sessions regarding Jose, the judge allowed him to stand up and confront the criminal as he wished to calm his heart. He did stand up and said to him, "You're an animal, a beast, and you don't deserve to live." He continued, "If you had fallen into my hands, I would have cut you to pieces, and I wouldn't have calmed down. But it's okay. The law will take my right and the right of my daughter from you." In the end, the verdict was pronounced, and honestly, it brought my heart some peace. Although this verdict won't bring the girls back, at least they got their justice. 5 of them were sentenced to death, while the 6th, who was only 14 years old, was sentenced to just 40 years in prison. I don't know why, maybe because he was still young. In America, honestly, they don't care whether you're young or old. It's just the law. I don't understand how this happened. The important thing is that he will be released from prison in 2033, when he will be 54 years old. Can you imagine? He went in at 14 and will come out at 54. O'Brien, Jose, and Peter were executed in 2010. Before he was executed, Peter expressed regret and said he deeply regretted what he had done. He admitted that it was a mistake. Jose also showed remorse before his execution. He lay on the ground and said he was regretful. Robert said nothing before his execution. He just remained silent, but it was clear he was very scared of death. Each time one of the 3 was executed, the parents of the victims were there, witnessing their execution. Yet, despite that, their pain for their daughters remained ignited inside them and wouldn't subside. As for the other 2, they were sentenced to life imprisonment instead of the death penalty, because at that time, a law had come into effect that no one under 18 could be executed. These 2 were both 17 years old at the time they committed the crime. Now, in 2014, they are 48 years old and will remain in prison until they die. In the years following the crime, people created a memorial for the girls at the site where they were killed and even inscribed their names there. Every month, many people go there to lay flowers and pray for them. As for the parents of the girls, they continued to fight for justice for their daughters even after the verdict was pronounced. They knew the criminals would keep appealing the sentences. Whenever one of them appealed, he would hire a lawyer to present it, but their requests were denied. The one who was 14 at the time had his appeal rejected 5 times due to the intervention of the victims' families. Jennifer's father, whose name was Randy, told the press, "I swear by the love I had for my daughter, even if it costs me everything, I will fight until this group gets the punishment they deserve, and they will never set foot outside again." He said, "I'll also fight to ensure that the 14-year-old is sentenced to life in prison, and I'll be present for all of them to make sure they don't get out." No one wanted those people as their neighbors, friends, or even family members. No one wanted them anywhere but in prison or dead. Unfortunately, in 2014, Randy died of liver cancer and was buried next to his only daughter, whom he adored. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this thrilling and mysterious story, Don't forget to support us by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Remember, secrets never stay hidden for long, and the truth always comes to light. Stay tuned for more exciting and suspenseful stories. See you in the next video.